Imagine stumbling upon ancient wisdom that could unlock the secrets of trust, discernment, and navigating the complexities of human nature. Today, we're unraveling King Solomon's timeless advice through the eyes of a young scholar on an extraordinary journey. But here's the twist. His discoveries could change how you see the world. Stay with us until the end to uncover insights that might just redefine how you approach trust and relationships. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if this sparks your curiosity. And we'd love to hear from you. What's one lesson you've learned from history that shaped your life? Drop it in the comments. Let's dive in. Miss Hale knelt on the cool stone floor of the old archives, his fingertips tracing the faded ink on a scroll half disintegrated by centuries of neglect. Dust motes danced in the slanting sunlight that penetrated the high, narrow windows of the Royal Library. Outside, the city murmured with distant voices, but here all was quiet. He had come a long way to this seat of ancient wisdom, seeking guidance in a world that had grown dangerously uncertain. He knew the legends. Once, King Solomon had walked these halls, the wisest and wealthiest monarch who ever lived. Miss Hale wanted to learn from him, to glean insight from those ancient days. Rumor had it that the library guarded scrolls capturing the king's final words, his warnings and laments. As a young scholar from a distant principality, Miss Hale had risked the wrath of his own court's intrigues to make this journey. He hoped to find, in these old parchments, the wisdom to navigate the complexities of trust and faith in a tumultuous era. He was no prince, only a low-born scribe favored by a countess who had recognized his keen mind. But rising in station had burdened him with strange alliances. Already, he'd learned, power attracts deception, and wealth draws false friends. Gently, Miss Hale teased open a particular fragment rumored to contain Solomon's cautionary tales about women who lead men astray, seductive flatterers, unfaithful partners, and contentious souls who stir endless strife. He expected ancient counsel on moral matters, but he also sensed hidden keys to understanding human nature. Little did he know how this knowledge would soon transform his own life. He straightened his shoulders, took a deep breath, and began reading, losing himself in that elegant script, unaware that a journey of spiritual discernment had just begun. Miss Hale read through the scroll's brittle lines, marveling at how vividly Solomon's counsel sprang to life. He pictured the great king, known for his understanding of human hearts, warning future generations about the subtle snares that so often entangled the unsuspecting. The words described three archetypes: the seductive woman, whose sweetness was a trap; the unfaithful woman, who eroded trust and fractured families; and the contentious woman, whose constant strife was like water dripping relentlessly onto stone. Miss Hale was intrigued. He had known women who fit none of these descriptions and had brought light to his world: a kindly matron who taught him to read, a traveling merchant's daughter who once shared bread and laughter. Yet he also recalled the cunning baroness who ensnared his former patron and reduced him to despair. He understood well enough that Solomon's words were not condemnations of all women, but warnings against particular types of influence that could lead a soul astray. He realized, too, that these figures might represent more than just individuals. They might embody aspects of human weakness. Seduction, betrayal, and discord could lurk anywhere, among men, in court politics, in one's own heart. The lesson was broader. Trust must be earned with care and tested with discernment. A sudden shiver passed through him. Outside, he could now hear distant voices clamoring, the sound of hooves clattering on stone, and the hush of midday turning into late afternoon. He secured the scroll beneath his arm. Just then, a gentle voice disturbed his reverie. "Are you lost, traveler?" it asked. Miss Hale turned to face a robed woman at the library's entrance, Yara, the keeper of the archives. Her wise eyes glinted kindly, but he could not help wondering, how would he judge her character? And could her guidance be trusted? Yara's gaze lingered on Miss Hale, and he offered a respectful bow. "I am not lost," he replied quietly, "though I seek direction." He showed her the fragment, and her eyebrows lifted. "Solomon's warnings," she murmured, nodding thoughtfully. "A seeker of wisdom. Then, come, there is a place we can speak." She led him to a small alcove where a low table and cushions awaited. Aromatic herbs hung drying nearby, and Miss Hale detected the scent of rosemary and thyme. He placed the scroll between them. Yara spoke softly. These warnings have guided many generations. Yet wisdom is not merely read. It must be lived. Have you found someone who tests the boundaries of your trust? Miss Hale hesitated, remembering the court intrigues that forced him to flee his homeland. He had once trusted a nobleman who offered him patronage. But when that lord fell under the influence of a beautiful stranger, everything crumbled. Manipulations, betrayals, and whispered half-truths led to Miss Hale's exile. He wondered if this was precisely what Solomon warned of. Yara listened with patience. Solomon counseled us to discern. Not everyone who appears virtuous truly fears the Lord. Some flatter, seduce, and ensnare. Others break promises, leading hearts astray. Still others stir endless conflict, robbing peace from any home. The king taught us to weigh hearts by their fruits, not their words. Her voice was calm, and her demeanor reassuring. Miss Hale felt drawn to trust her, but he was vigilant. He thought of Solomon's words, "Trust in the Lord, not your own understanding." Could he apply this here? Perhaps God had brought him into this quiet corner so he might learn a teacher's wisdom. "I must journey onward," he said, "to see these truths with my own eyes." Yara smiled gently. "Then go in peace, scholar, and let discernment be your compass." Departing the library, Miss Hale entered the streets of the ancient city. Stone walls rose high, casting cool shadows, while narrow alleys bustled with merchants' voices. He had an uneasy feeling. He possessed knowledge now, but not yet wisdom. He carried Solomon's words in his mind as a lantern in darkness. But how to apply them? He recalled Yara's parting words. Discernment is not learned in isolation. He must observe people, weigh their actions, and test the sincerity of their intentions. The city, once under Solomon's reign, now belonged to a lineage less guided by divine counsel. Rumors drifted on every corner. A noble's daughter rumored to bewitch powerful men, a wealthy widow who broke alliances without remorse, and a royal cousin infamous for starting quarrels. Could these tales be true? Miss Hale felt a pang of curiosity. He imagined these women as living examples of Solomon's 3 warnings. But he knew it was unwise to judge on rumor alone. First, he would meet these individuals, or at least observe them. He made his way through a busy marketplace, where spices and linens competed for attention. There he heard a traveler boasting of a courtesan named Neria, renowned for her beauty, wit, and persuasive manner. Men left their families and fortunes for her, or so the rumors said. Was she the seductive presence Solomon warned of? Further along, he heard mutterings about a once faithful merchant's wife, now known for secret liaisons that ruined her husband's good name. And in the courtyard of a wealthy estate, a distant cousin of the king's house, a woman named Seraphine, was known for stirring endless quarrels between factions. Miss Hale decided to find Neria first. He would watch, not with lustful eyes, but with a mind prepared by ancient counsel. Would he see truth in these cautionary tales? As dusk approached, Miss Hale found himself outside a modest stone villa bordered by flowering vines. Inside, laughter and voices drifted through shuttered windows. He lingered in the shadows of a fig tree, heart pounding slightly. Would Neria be here? A pair of men emerged, their steps unsteady from wine. They whispered heatedly, arguing over who had captured Neria's attention. One cursed the other and stormed off, looking wounded and humiliated. Miss Hale noted the tension etched on their faces. When the door opened again, a graceful figure stepped onto the threshold, illuminated by lamplight. Neria wore a silken robe dyed a deep crimson. Her hair tumbled down in dark waves, and when she spoke, her voice was smooth as honey. She bid farewell to a guest with sweet words and a playful smile. The man, an older merchant, stared at her with rapt adoration. She reached out to adjust his cloak collar, lingering just a moment too long. He bowed low, murmuring grateful nonsense, before stumbling into the night. Miss Hale watched, intrigued. Neria's behavior seemed enchanting, yet he recognized something off. Her kindness felt performative. He remembered Solomon's words. The seductive woman entices with flattering lips. Her gestures could be sincere, but they might also be a practice craft. Not wishing to jump to conclusions, Miss Hale stayed hidden as another visitor arrived. This time it was a younger noble, cheeks flushed with anticipation. Neria greeted him with the same disarming charm, showering him with compliments. Soon, his laughter carried into the silent street. Miss Hale's mind whirled. These men left with desires stoked but souls uneasy. Did Neria intend to destroy them? Or was she simply thriving in a world that rewarded cunning? The night's silence offered no answer yet, but Miss Hale knew he needed to learn more. Miss Hale spent the next few days discreetly observing Neria's household from the market stalls and quiet corners of the street. He noted the pattern. Wealthy men entered hopeful and left conflicted. Gossip circulated that Neria never demanded gifts or gold directly. Yet men showered her with jewels and favors. She was always kind, always pleasing. Yet something beneath her polished exterior struck him as hollow. He pondered Solomon's analogy. The seductive woman was like honey that turned to bitterness. Some of the men who visited Neria soon quarreled among themselves over her attention. Some neglected their work, and a few even abandoned their families. Miss Hale concluded she possessed a subtle power to ensnare hearts and derail lives. But why did they fall so easily? Solomon's wisdom said it stemmed from a lack of discernment. They wanted flattery, not truth. Neria offered an illusion, a sense of importance, adventure, and pleasure without responsibility. Men who sought that superficial comfort paid a hidden price. One late evening, while Miss Hale lingered in the shadows, Neria emerged alone, walking quietly in the moonlight. The city slept, and her face relaxed into an expression of weary detachment. Without witnesses, her smile faded. She paused by a fountain, trailing her fingers in the water, as if rinsing away a mask. Miss Hale realized that though Neria caused chaos, she might be trapped by her own choices. Perhaps once she craved security or love, and learned to survive through seduction. The tragedy was that now, in her pursuit of influence, she destroyed trust and peace. He sighed, thinking of Solomon's first warning fulfilled before his eyes. He must move on. He had seen enough. His next step was to seek out the rumored unfaithful woman. Would that pattern also match the ancient king's counsel? Miss Hale left behind Neria's quarter and journeyed toward the merchant's district. There, long rows of warehouses and workshops lined dusty streets. He sought out the household of a merchant named Arel, known for fine fabrics and spices. His wife, Zephora, had once been praised for her loyalty and godly demeanor, or so the older texts hinted. Yet now rumors abounded of her secret meetings and whispered promises to her husband's rivals. He approached their home, an elegant structure with carved wooden doors and a small garden. He watched silently over 2 days, noting the comings and goings. Arel himself was tall, dignified, always busy with crates and negotiations. He seemed burdened, shoulders bowed under invisible weight. Zephora was poised, elegant, and generous with smiles. Yet something about her interactions unsettled him. When Arel departed each morning to his warehouse, Zephora received visitors. Not many, just a few select men. Miss Hale suspected these were more than friendly visits. He could not accuse without evidence, but he saw the way she leaned close, touched an arm, laughed too freely. He observed a guest slip quietly through a side gate just before dusk, emerging much later with a satisfied grin. That night, Miss Hale climbed onto a low roof across the street, risking much to glimpse inside the garden. He saw Zephora meeting a man, Saren, a rival merchant who specialized in rare dyes. They whispered softly, their heads bent together. Zephora's laughter was subdued, yet intimate. Miss Hale realized they discussed information that could undercut Arel's trade routes. Solomon had warned, the unfaithful woman's sweetness turns bitter. Her path leads to despair. Here she was not only betraying marriage vows, but also trust, loyalties, and livelihoods. Through her secrets, she undermined Arel's prosperity and honor, leaving him vulnerable to ruin. As dawn approached, Miss Hale wondered about Arel's fate. He watched from a distance as the merchant returned home that morning, weary from overnight accounting. Zipporah greeted him at the threshold, placing a hand on his arm. She spoke soothing words. He could not hear them, but her posture was gentle. Arel smiled sadly, as if believing her kindness genuine. Yet Miss Hale knew what lay beneath the surface. Zipporah's betrayal wasn't only marital, it was spiritual and moral. She broke faith with her husband's heart and business, selling secrets for personal gain. Perhaps she sought luxury, excitement, or influence in a more subtle way than Neria did. But the outcome was the same: the weakening of trust, the corrosion of bonds. Solomon's words echoed: honey that turns bitter, oil that slicks the path to ruin. Miss Hale saw now how betrayal worked quietly. Unlike seduction's flamboyant allure, unfaithfulness ate at the foundation of a home, leaving the husband disoriented and vulnerable. No matter Arel's wisdom or hard work, without a faithful partner, he was constantly undermined. Miss Hale's heart felt heavy. He wondered if Arel suspected anything. Perhaps he saw odd inconsistencies or felt nagging doubts. But sometimes love blinds the heart. The unfaithful might deny wrongdoing, twisting reality until the betrayed doubt their own instincts. This is how spiritual rot sets in. Miss Hale decided he must confront this truth firsthand. He would find a way to speak to Arel, gently and cautiously, not to reveal the affair outright. He was an outsider, but maybe to test the merchant's understanding. Before doing so, he remembered he must also confirm the third type, the contentious woman. He sighed. His quest felt burdensome, yet he persevered, determined to understand all facets of these warnings before he returned to share wisdom with others. He moved on, traveling toward the noble district where great mansions flanked manicured gardens. Here dwelled Seraphine, a distant cousin to the king's line. She was said to be accomplished, beautiful, and charming, yet possessed a spirit of discord. Conflicts seemed to follow her presence like bees to nectar. As Miss Hale approached her estate, he heard raised voices. Two servants stood by a gate, arguing about who had mislaid a parcel. Seraphine's voice, though not loud, carried force as she leaned from a balcony above, directing blame sharply at one, then shifting it onto another. Her tone was not seductive or pleading. It was accusatory, stirring bitterness. Over several days, Miss Hale witnessed a pattern. Visitors to her home arrived with amiable intentions but left quarreling among themselves. Allies turned into rivals after a single afternoon in her salon. She knew how to find a person's vulnerabilities and pick at them skillfully. With gentle suggestions or critical remarks, she planted suspicion, envy, and resentment. Miss Hale recalled Solomon's words: "It is better to dwell on a rooftop corner than to share a house with a contentious woman." The image rang true here. He imagined living under her roof, never knowing peace. Every conversation would end in accusation or complaint. No banquet or feast could bring joy if discontent seeped into every toast. Seraphine's discord did not feed on desire or betrayal, but on pride and insecurity. She thrived by pitting people against each other. Perhaps her influence grew as rivals tore each other apart. She might benefit from chaos, gaining status while others wasted energy in conflicts she sparked. Miss Hale sighed heavily. Now he had seen all three types Solomon warned against. He understood their differences, but also a common thread: all corroded trust, peace, and faith. Miss Hale retired to a quiet inn on the outskirts of the city to think. He had come to learn from Solomon's words, and now he had concrete examples. Neria represented the allure of seduction. Zipporah's betrayal showed the quiet rot of unfaithfulness. Seraphine's discord exemplified contentiousness. Each brought destruction in unique ways. But what next? Knowing these truths was one thing. Living wisely was another. Solomon said to trust in the Lord and seek discernment. How might Miss Hale transform understanding into action? He reflected on the counsel that God's wisdom can guide a person's heart. A man who fears the Lord and cherishes virtue is better equipped to avoid these snares. If one appreciates modesty and honesty, he will not be lured by empty flattery. If he values fidelity, he can guard his heart against secret betrayals. If he esteems peace, he can refuse to be drawn into endless strife. Miss Hale prayed quietly in his modest rented chamber. He asked God for guidance, for the strength to apply what he had learned. He remembered James's words. Centuries later, if any of you lacks wisdom, ask God. Perhaps the seeds were here. In ancient council, Miss Hale decided he would attempt to speak with those involved, to see if he could sow understanding or at least confirm what he'd learned. He would start with Arel, the merchant. Perhaps he could subtly hint that trust must be tested, that one's partner should reflect God's values. He did not wish to accuse Zephora directly, but maybe he could help Arel see truth before ruin came. Then, he might approach Neria's environment indirectly, sharing a story with a victimized client about true worth versus false praise. Wisdom demanded subtlety, not confrontation. He must proceed carefully. Miss Hale rose early and ventured back to the merchant district. He found Arel supervising the loading of goods onto a caravan. The merchant appeared strained, sweat beading on his brow. Miss Hale approached politely, introducing himself as a traveling scribe interested in trade policies. They exchanged pleasantries. Arel was courteous, if distracted. Miss Hale steered the conversation toward trust in business. Reputation is everything, Arel said. Without honesty and loyalty, everything falls apart. Miss Hale nodded. And at home, surely faithfulness anchors one's spirit, does it not? He spoke gently, trying not to sound suspicious. Arel sighed deeply, as if Miss Hale's words touched a hidden ache. Of course, he said, forcing a smile. A man's household should be his refuge. Arel hesitated, then confided. Lately, I felt some unease. Rumors circulate that secrets of my trade routes leak to competitors. I cannot imagine who, he trailed off, looking at the ground. Miss Hale chose his words carefully. Wisdom from old times says a faithful partner strengthens a home, but an unfaithful one drains its foundation. Have you considered everyone within your walls? Friend? Those closest to us can sway fortune. Arel's face darkened. Are you suggesting? He shook his head. No. Zephora is my heart's companion. Miss Hale placed a reassuring hand on the man's shoulder. I only say, trust must be discerned. Sometimes even those we love may be led astray, or pressured by others. He lowered his voice. Verify truths before it's too late. Arel narrowed his eyes, but Miss Hale saw a flicker of uncertainty. The seed was planted. He bowed and left, hoping Arel would watch more closely, confront gentle inconsistencies, and seek counsel from God, without accusing outright. Miss Hale had offered a nudge toward discernment. The rest lay in the merchant's hands and in divine guidance. Next, Miss Hale made his way to the neighborhood near Neria's villa. He saw a young noble, Galad, lingering at a fountain, dressed in fine robes. Galad's eyes darted anxiously toward Neria's home. Miss Hale approached, offering a smile. Good day. Miss Hale greeted. You seem troubled. Galad grimaced. I am waiting to see if Neria will receive me tonight. But she sent no word. He looked like a student desperate for a teacher's approval. Miss Hale recalled Solomon's warnings of seduction. He decided to share a parable. I once knew a farmer who loved sweet fruit. He found a tree with luscious pears, the sweetest he'd ever tasted. He ate greedily, day after day, until his stomach ached and his teeth pained him. Too late, he realized sweetness alone does not sustain health. Galad listened, puzzled. What do pears have to do with me? Miss Hale met his eyes. A relationship that only offers flattery and pleasure, without truth or growth, might leave one spiritually sick. A wise king once said, charm can deceive. Beauty fades. True worth comes from reverence for what is right. Galad frowned, glancing at Neria's door. She is beautiful and gracious. Is that not enough? Miss Hale shrugged gently. For a moment, perhaps. But what do you gain when delight fades? Do you find loyalty, honesty, and mutual respect? He lowered his voice. Consider what you truly desire in life. If it is lasting peace, do not mistake hollow sweetness for nourishment. Galad stepped back, uncertain. You suggest I abandon her? Miss Hale offered no direct command. I suggest you seek God's guidance. Ask if this path leads to growth or ruin. Wisdom protects the heart. As Miss Hale departed, he saw Galad's troubled expression. A small seed of doubt might bloom into discernment. He hoped the young man would pause before tumbling deeper into illusion. With 2 quiet interventions done, Miss Hale considered whether to address Seraphine's sphere. He lingered near her estate, where footmen and courtiers passed in elegant attire. He overheard servants gossiping. She praised the king's advisor to one guest, then ridiculed him to another. Both guests left furious. Another said, "She sets brother against brother without ever raising her voice." How could Miss Hale counter such subtle poison? Confrontation seemed futile. He recalled Solomon's advice, better to seek peace, to avoid entanglement. Sometimes confronting discord only fuels it. Instead, Miss Hale chose a different strategy. He found himself sitting at a small wine shop, where 2 minor nobles argued about something Seraphine had said. They wore fine cloaks and looked frustrated. Miss Hale intervened gently. "Friends, what stirs your anger?" They explained that Seraphine hinted that each had spoken ill of the other behind closed doors. Now, each suspected betrayal. Miss Hale listened, then asked calmly, "Have you known each other long?" "Yes," one said, "since childhood." "Have you found each other loyal in the past?" "Yes," the other admitted. Miss Hale said, "Why doubt what years have proven true? And trust what one afternoon's whisper suggests? Perhaps this person delights in discord. If so, must you dance to her tune?" The nobles exchanged uneasy glances. "We may have been too quick to anger," said one. "Yes," agreed the other. "We shall speak frankly to each other, not rely on her hints." Miss Hale smiled, grateful, by urging them to recall their long friendship and question rumors. He had countered contention with reason. He did not name Seraphine directly, but he planted a notion: trust proven bonds. Do not yield to those who profit from division. He prayed they would remember these words next time they stood in her garden. Miss Hale's attempts to influence others were subtle, but he felt a sense of purpose. He had not solved all problems. Nereus still enchanted men, Zephora still betrayed her husband, and Seraphine still stirred trouble. But maybe a few individuals would pause, reflect, and resist these destructive patterns. His own understanding of Solomon's warnings deepened. He realized the king's counsel was not meant to condemn women or men, but to warn everyone to guard their hearts. Nereus' seduction thrived on emotional weakness and hunger for praise. Zephora's betrayal took root in complacent trust. Seraphine's discord found fertile ground in pride and insecurities. All these weaknesses lurk in every human heart. The answer, as Solomon had said, lay in discernment and reverence for God's truth. Without it, humans become easy prey for deception, infidelity, and conflict. Now Miss Hale felt called to return to the library, to speak again with Yara. He wanted to share what he had seen and learned. Perhaps, together, they could distill these lessons into words that might guide future generations. He departed the noble district at dusk, following lantern-lit streets until he reached the library's grand doors. Yara welcomed him with a knowing look. "Your eyes carry new weight," she said softly, leading him into a secluded reading room. "You have walked among those Solomon warned us about." Miss Hale nodded. "I have seen the seductive, the unfaithful, the contentious. They match the king's descriptions perfectly. Yet I also see a deeper truth. People choose these paths due to their own brokenness and desires." Yara listened as Miss Hale described his observations and subtle interventions. She smiled. "You have learned well, but let us commit these insights to writing, so the wisdom may endure." They settled in a small chamber lit by a single oil lamp. The scent of old parchment filled the air. Miss Hale took a reed pen and unrolled a blank scroll. Yara stood beside him, arms folded, eyes thoughtful. "Begin," she said. Miss Hale dipped his pen and wrote, "Concerning the temptations that lead hearts astray, King Solomon offered counsel." He paused, then described each type of destructive influence, using simple language that future readers might understand. He wrote of the seductive influence, how flattery can mask malice, how physical beauty and kind words alone do not ensure goodness. He added that true virtue resides in reverence for God, honesty, and devotion to what is right. Then he moved to the unfaithful influence. explaining that a partner who betrays trust destroys the foundation of a home, and that vigilance and prayer are needed to keep love pure. Finally, he described the contentious influence. He compared it to a persistent drip of water, eroding peace over time. He warned that one must cherish peace and unity, seeking friendships and alliances that build rather than destroy. Yara nodded as Miss Hale wrote, occasionally suggesting a phrase or a proverb. Emphasize that discernment is a gift from God, she said, and that anyone, man or woman, can fall into these patterns if not guided by wisdom. Miss Hale agreed. He wrote, discernment allows one to see past surface charm, hollow promises, and malicious intent. Seek wisdom from God, who gives freely to those who ask. When the scroll was completed, Miss Hale felt a calm satisfaction. The warnings, once theoretical, now lived in words shaped by actual encounters. He had transformed lessons from ancient texts into a timeless guide, hoping to spare others unnecessary sorrow. As Miss Hale encounters Neria, a woman whose charm is as alluring as it is potentially destructive, it raises a powerful question. How do we discern between genuine kindness and manipulation? What do you think? Is it better to trust instinct or observe behavior over time? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your take. With the scroll complete, Miss Hale leaned back, his shoulders relaxing. Yara placed a gentle hand on his arm, smiling softly. You have done well, young scholar. Yet, wisdom is not only for the page. How will these lessons shape your own life? Miss Hale considered her question. He had arrived in the city a seeker, uncertain how to navigate trust and intimacy. Now he understood the importance of careful discernment, but how to apply it personally. He remembered his homeland, the court intrigues, the friends who turned foes when flattery and rumors took hold. He realized he must return home eventually, fortified by what he learned, to serve as a voice of reason and stability. Perhaps he could help his patron avoid the traps that once led their court astray. He also thought of finding a partner someday. Solomon's words praised a virtuous woman, one whose worth surpassed rubies. He must seek someone who loves truth and fears the Lord. Such a partnership could flourish, avoiding the pitfalls he witnessed. Before he returned home, though, he would continue observing, learning, and deepening his understanding. He might speak with Yara more about the scriptures, pray for guidance, and strengthen his relationship with God. He turned to Yara. I think I must carry this wisdom forward, both in my actions and my counsel to others. I have seen how subtle these dangers are, yet I have also seen how a little guidance can help others step back from the edge. Yara nodded, satisfied. Your heart is in the right place. Remember, wisdom grows when shared, and we must remain humble. For even Solomon, with all his understanding, stumbled. Let that humbleness guard your soul. Miss Hale bowed his head in gratitude, feeling more resolved and anchored than ever before. Miss Hale spent the following days revisiting the places and people he had observed, this time without secrecy. He wandered the marketplace, listened to storytellers, and watched children play. He reflected on how wisdom and virtue might be nurtured within a community. He noticed something curious. Most people were neither purely good nor purely malicious. They were complex, shaped by their environment, yearnings, and fears. Those who fell into the patterns Solomon warned about might have been different under other circumstances. Neria, for example, what if she had found honest love early in life? Instead of learning to manipulate affection to survive, Zephora might have remained loyal if she felt cherished and secure, rather than tempted by forbidden alliances. Seraphine's love of discord might have turned into leadership if guided by humility. Miss Hale understood that wisdom teaches compassion as well as caution. He must not hate or fear those who do harm but understand their brokenness and pray they find redemption. Yet, caution and healthy boundaries remain essential. One afternoon, while purchasing dried figs, Miss Hale recognized Galad hovering nearby. The young noble greeted him and thanked him for the parable he told by the fountain. Galad confessed he hadn't returned to Neria's villa and instead sought friends who valued him for more than flattery. He seemed calmer, more thoughtful. Miss Hale smiled, pleased to see a small positive change. May God bless your discernment, he said. Galad nodded, eyes clear. This small success heartened Miss Hale. Wisdom's seeds can grow, changing lives. If one young man could step away from illusion, perhaps others could too. Miss Hale whispered a prayer of thanks. He knew not all would choose rightly, but to influence even one soul towards truth was worth the effort. Encouraged by this encounter, Miss Hale decided to speak with Urel again. He found the merchant inspecting new deliveries of saffron and myrrh. Urel seemed troubled but resolute. "I took your advice," he told Miss Hale quietly when they were alone. "I questioned Zephora carefully and observed her habits more closely. I uncovered a pattern of secret visits." Miss Hale's heart sank. He had not wanted to cause pain, but truth was necessary. "I'm sorry," he said softly. Urel managed a sad smile. "At least now I understand why my profits dwindled, why my business partners grew distant. She fed them information and lies. But now I know the truth. I can protect my work and seek restoration. I will confront this openly." Miss Hale nodded. "May God give you strength. If possible, seek guidance from elders and mediators who can restore order. Sometimes confession leads to repentance, though not always." Urel agreed. I do not know what she truly wanted. Perhaps security or status. Perhaps she doubted I could provide well enough. But now I must rely on God's help. I've prayed as you suggested. Miss Hale placed a supportive hand on Urel's arm. He admired the merchant's courage in facing betrayal. Perhaps this was the start of healing. Even if the marriage ended, Urel would rebuild on a foundation of truth. That evening, Miss Hale prayed for them both. Unfaithfulness had shattered their trust, but now at least the corruption was exposed. With honesty and counsel, perhaps new beginnings were possible, if not together, then apart, each learning from this sorrow. This reinforced Miss Hale's realization. Wisdom and discernment not only prevent harm but also provide a path toward redemption after the fall. The question of Seraphine lingered in Miss Hale's mind. Dealing with seduction or unfaithfulness seemed more straightforward than halting a tide of contention. Her influence was subtle, weaving distrust and envy seamlessly into conversations. He realized he might not be able to change her directly, but perhaps he could empower those around her to resist her tactics. The two nobles he counseled previously were a start. If more people recognized her pattern and refused to be provoked, Seraphine's influence might wane. Miss Hale sought out gatherings where Seraphine's name came up and gently inserted a few key ideas. Judge people by proven character, not rumor. Recall past unity before believing new slanders. Question why certain individuals always bring you bad news about your friends. Over time, he noticed small shifts. Some acquaintances of Seraphine began to doubt her divisive whispers. Others learned to clarify misunderstandings directly, while Seraphine still held some sway. The seeds of caution were sown. Miss Hale understood he could not eradicate all discord. Human hearts were prone to pride. Yet wisdom suggested that if enough people recognized the nature of conflict's source, they might create a counterbalance of peace. This was humbling but realistic. One cannot force virtue upon others. We can only offer counsel, model peace, and trust God to nurture growth. Solomon himself had struggled with these truths. Even the greatest wisdom cannot guarantee compliance. As Miss Hale reflected on this, he realized that spreading wisdom was like planting seeds. Some fall on rocky ground, some are stolen by birds, but some take root. Over time, even a small crop of truth can feed many souls. One evening, Miss Hale found himself near the outskirts of the city walls. He wanted quiet space to think and pray, away from the bustling crowds. He settled on a low hill overlooking the rooftops. The sky brushed with pink and gold as the sun dipped low. He considered what he had learned. Solomon's warnings remained timeless. Be wary of the seductive, who charm without substance, the unfaithful, who betray trust, and the contentious, who sow strife. Yet, also, he learned that these pitfalls are not inevitable. One can cultivate discernment by seeking God's wisdom, by valuing truth over vanity, loyalty over gain, and peace over division. He recalled Solomon's teaching that a virtuous partner is more valuable than rubies. Miss Hale knew he must strive for virtue within himself first. Virtue attracts virtue. If one's heart is anchored in God's truth, they are less likely to be misled. From this vantage, he also reflected that these lessons apply to all relationships, not just romantic ones. A toxic business partner, a manipulative friend, or a warmonger in politics can embody these same destructive traits. Discernment protects all aspects of life. The wind rustled dry grasses. The scent of earth and distant incense drifted by. Miss Hale gave thanks for having found this wisdom. He prayed for guidance on how to share it further. Perhaps he would return home soon, carrying these insights. He might teach younger scribes, council leaders, and record these lessons in a form accessible to many. Night settled gently over the city, and a crescent moon rose. Miss Hale smiled. The darkness of ignorance recedes when even a small lamp of wisdom is kindled. As days passed, Miss Hale returned often to the library, where Yara became not only a mentor but a friend. Together, they reviewed ancient texts, comparing Solomon's warnings to other wisdom literature. They found patterns. Many cultures cautioned against flattery, faithlessness, and discord. These human struggles transcended time and place. Miss Hale asked Yara how best to preserve their newly written scrolls so future generations might benefit. She showed him how to store it in a clay jar, sealed with wax, to protect against dampness and insects. While working, Miss Hale confided, "I fear that even if we preserve these writings, will people heed them?" Yara smiled gently. "Some will, some will not. Our task is to offer truth. How it's received is beyond our control." He nodded. This was the essence of wisdom's burden, knowing that truth can guide but not force. The city's mood seemed slightly different to him now. Was he imagining it? Or were fewer men gathered outside Neria's villa at all hours? Perhaps Galad's withdrawal made others pause. He heard whispers that Arel had confronted Zephora with evidence of her disloyalty, resulting in a painful, but clarifying, confrontation. Rumor had it Seraphine's influence faced quiet resistance as more people questioned her insinuations. Small changes, but meaningful. Miss Hale understood that transformation would not be dramatic or swift. Human hearts change slowly. Still, any step toward honesty and harmony mattered. He found satisfaction in knowing he had done his part. In a world rife with temptation, betrayal, and discord, even a single individual's quiet work could tip the balance toward understanding. He thanked God for guiding him here. Miss Hale realized his time in this city was nearing its natural conclusion. He had gathered wisdom, seen its principles confirmed, and shared what he could. Perhaps it was time to journey home, to carry these lessons into his own land. Before departing, he decided to visit the library's roof at sunrise. A place Yara mentioned was quiet and offered a panoramic view of the city. He climbed the narrow stairs and emerged onto a flat terrace guarded by a low stone parapet. The dawn sky was lavender and rose. He saw the silhouettes of minarets, domes, and towers. Below, the people he had watched and influenced went about their lives. The world looked peaceful from above. Yet he knew within these streets the struggles he observed continued. Still, Miss Hale smiled. He remembered Solomon's admonishment to trust in the Lord. If people learned to ask God for discernment, to examine hearts, and to measure trust carefully, they could avoid many sorrows. A flock of birds took flight, their wings catching the golden edge of sunlight. Miss Hale leaned on the parapet and whispered a prayer. "Lord, let these truths live in my heart and guide others toward your wisdom." He lingered a moment, then made his way down. He would say farewell to Yara, gather his belongings, and set out on the road. He imagined the fields, hills, and rivers he would cross, the villages he might advise, the families he might warn or comfort. Life is a tapestry woven of many stories, and his thread now contained threads of Solomon's teachings. He felt a sense of fulfillment, carrying forward a beacon of understanding. After bidding Yara farewell and exchanging blessings, Miss Hale stepped onto the main road leading out of the city. The path was lined with olive trees. His satchel felt lighter now, though it contained valuable notes and references. Wisdom weighed nothing yet enriched infinitely. He recalled the initial fear and uncertainty he felt when first opening Solomon's scroll. Now he carried not only knowledge but personal experience. He had seen how easily people fall into traps, the allure of sweet words, the sting of broken trust, the burden of perpetual strife. He also understood the remedy, seeking God's guidance, valuing truth and virtue over superficial attraction, building trust on honesty rather than flattery, preserving peace by resisting attempts to sow discord, and above all, guarding one's heart against shallow temptations. The countryside opened before him. He passed small farms where people labored in the fields, families cooperating to bring forth harvests from the earth. Here, he saw an opposite image: honest toil, mutual support, and gratitude for daily bread. Such simplicity reminded him that human life could be wholesome and good if aligned with divine principles. He promised himself that once home, he would share these teachings, helping others differentiate between hollow allure and genuine love, between secret treachery and loyal companionship, between chaotic feuding and harmonious dialogue. In doing so, he honored Solomon's legacy, ensuring those ancient words would live on. As he walked, a sense of peace enveloped him. The sun rose higher, warming his back. He saw his journey as part of a greater tapestry, God's wisdom woven through generations, carried by faithful hearts. By midday, Miss Hale reached a crossroads where travelers gathered to rest. Merchants with camels, pilgrims with staffs, and farmers with carts all shared shade beneath a large cedar. Miss Hale found a spot to sit, breaking bread with a kind farmer who offered him goat cheese. A conversation arose among the travelers about trust. One merchant complained he'd been cheated in a nearby town. A pilgrim recounted how a seeming friend tried to lure him into dishonest schemes. Another traveler admitted his sister's marriage collapsed due to betrayal. Miss Hale listened, heart aching at how common these sorrows were. Then he spoke up, sharing insights gleaned from Solomon's wisdom. Consider choosing partners, friends, and confidants with care. Watch not only for charm or beauty but for honesty, devotion to what's right, and respect for peace. He gave examples without naming names, painting a picture of the three types of harmful influence. The travelers nodded, intrigued. Some asked questions. The merchant wondered how to test honesty before trading. Miss Hale suggested looking for consistency and verifying claims. The pilgrim asked how to resist temptation. Miss Hale advised prayer and focusing on long-term values over fleeting pleasure. The traveler with family troubles wondered how to rebuild trust. Miss Hale counseled patience, confession, and seeking wise mediators. As they parted, Miss Hale noticed a quiet gratitude in their eyes. Even small kernels of wisdom could soothe wounded hearts. He realized that these lessons were universal, not confined to any city or era. Resuming his journey, Miss Hale praised God for orchestrating this meeting. Each encounter confirmed that Solomon's warnings had timeless relevance. The further Miss Hale traveled from the city, the more serene the landscape became. Hills rolled gently, flocks grazed, and streams flowed quietly. His mind felt clear and focused. He contemplated how one might summarize Solomon's wisdom in a phrase: guard your heart with discernment and revere God's truth. He wondered if he would ever marry and what qualities he'd seek in a wife. He imagined someone who cherished truth and loved God above all. Her words would uplift, not flatter. Her faithfulness would stand firm under strain. Her presence would foster harmony, not strife. Such a woman would be a blessing, reflecting virtues that Solomon praised. Miss Hale knew that discerning her character would require careful observation, patience, and prayer. Just as he had practiced in the city, he reminded himself that he must also strive to be a virtuous partner, worthy of such a woman's trust. He thought too about friendships. He would surround himself with those who sought righteousness, who valued honesty and peace. With them, he could share burdens and joys without fear of betrayal or manipulation. A gentle breeze stirred wildflowers by the path. Miss Hale breathed deeply, feeling God's presence in the silence. He realized that wisdom's fruit is peace. When one understands these pitfalls and chooses well, one's life can blossom, free from constant suspicion and turmoil. He resolved to become a teacher of this wisdom, perhaps not as a formal role, but by living it and offering counsel to those who asked. In this, he honored Solomon's legacy and served the divine purpose of spreading truth and understanding. As evening approached, Mishael sought shelter in a village inn. He struck up a conversation with an old man who recognized the scholar's accent and asked about his travels. Mishael explained he'd been to the city once graced by Solomon's wisdom. The old man's eyes lit up. "Did you learn something worthwhile?" he asked. Mishael answered, "I learned the importance of discernment in choosing whom to trust. I learned that seduction, unfaithfulness, and contention are ancient snares. Yet, I also learned that seeking God's guidance, loving truth, and valuing virtue can protect us." The old man nodded, stroking his beard. "My wife and I have been married 50 years. We faced hard times, temptations, and disagreements, but we prayed together, spoke honestly, and forgave each other. Her faithfulness is my treasure. I cannot imagine life without her steady goodness." Mishael smiled, warmed by this living testimony. Here was a reflection of the virtuous partner Solomon praised, someone far more valuable than rubies, her worth proven over decades of shared trials and triumphs. "Your story confirms the truth I learned," Mishael said. "A virtuous life, built on God's principles, withstands all storms." They shared bread and a simple meal. The old man's eyes shone with gratitude as he described his humble home, where peace reigned. Mishael felt comforted, knowing that such examples existed. Not everyone succumbed to the traps Solomon described. Many thrived by heeding wisdom. That night, in the quiet darkness of his room, Mishael prayed again. He thanked God for confirming these lessons through living witnesses. Wisdom was not theoretical. It dwelled in real hearts and homes, illuminating life's path with gentle light. The next morning, Mishael continued his journey homeward. He considered how to compile his experiences into a cohesive guide. He had the scroll co-written with Yara, containing direct lessons. Perhaps he would add narratives, stories illustrating how these truths play out in real life. He imagined a teaching format. First, present Solomon's warnings in clear form. Then share examples like Neria, Zephora, and Seraphine's influences. Finally, provide stories of those who chose virtue instead, like the old man and his faithful wife. Balancing caution with hope would give learners perspective. Pitfalls exist, but so do shining examples of goodness. He could emphasize practical steps, pray for wisdom, observe actions over words, seek counsel from trustworthy elders, and verify trust slowly. Also, encourage understanding that those who do wrong may be broken themselves. Compassion need not blind discernment, but it can guide responses that allow for healing and forgiveness where possible. As he walked, he hummed a quiet tune. The landscape was now familiar, edges of his homeland coming into view. He would soon see the old gates, the fields he knew as a child. He would meet his former patron and share what he learned, hoping to strengthen the court's moral foundation. Yes, he would teach that the key lies in fearing the Lord and loving truth. With that anchor, one need not fear seduction, for flattery loses its charm. Betrayal becomes less likely when hearts are firmly aligned with righteousness. Quarrels lose their sting when peace is the cherished goal. Mishael's heart brimmed with purpose. He was ready to bring this treasure home. As Mishael neared his hometown, he passed through a valley where a river meandered. Memories rose unbidden. As a child, he splashed in these waters, carefree. Now he returned with a deeper understanding of human nature. He thought back to his initial spark of curiosity, when he first opened that old scroll in the dusty archives. He had expected simple moral instructions. Instead, he found a profound understanding of human frailty and divine guidance. He realized wisdom is not just a set of rules. It's a lens through which to perceive the world. In that lens, beauty no longer dazzled blindly. He could see the motives behind charming smiles. Loyalty was not assumed. It had to be proven. Peace was not a given. It must be guarded. Yet none of this led him to cynicism. Instead, it inspired hope. For if one could see clearly, one could also choose rightly. Approaching the familiar fields, he greeted old neighbors. They remembered the studious boy who left to gain learning. He told them he had returned with lessons that might help young and old alike. Some invited him to supper, eager to hear his tales. He would begin modestly, over simple meals, sharing Solomon's wisdom in everyday language. He would help them see the importance of choosing partners, friends, and advisors carefully. He would remind them that God's wisdom is accessible to all who ask, and he would encourage them to value sincerity, faithfulness, and harmony. As the sun dipped behind distant hills, Miss Hale felt as if he carried a precious lamp lighting his path home. By twilight, Miss Hale reached the outskirts of his town. The scent of hearth smoke drifted through the cool air. He approached the Countess's manor, his former patron, where he once served as scribe. He hoped to share his newfound insights with her court. He knocked, and a steward admitted him. The Countess remembered him fondly. She had lamented his departure. Brought on by court intrigues, he tried to escape. Now, seeing the calm determination in his eyes, she welcomed him warmly. Over a simple dinner, Miss Hale recounted his journey, the wisdom he gleaned, and the patterns he observed. He explained Solomon's warnings about certain kinds of harmful influences and the importance of discernment. The Countess and her advisors listened intently. Some nodded, recalling their own past mistakes or disappointments. The Countess smiled. "Miss Hale, you have returned wiser. This knowledge could strengthen our community. Our people will benefit from teaching that encourages careful trust rather than suspicion, devotion rather than fickleness, and peace rather than feuding." He thanked her and pledged to serve by offering counsel and leading discussions. The court would set aside evenings where villagers could hear stories and teachings derived from Solomon's wisdom. Perhaps a new tradition would form, a gathering under torchlight, where truths were spoken and hearts uplifted. Miss Hale felt grateful. He had transformed a distant king's ancient warnings into a living message for his own community. He had bridged centuries, connecting Solomon's voice to the present. In doing so, he honored the divine spark of wisdom that flows through generations. In the weeks and months that followed, Miss Hale became known as a teacher of wisdom in his community. He shared Solomon's lessons not as condemnation but as guidance. He emphasized that all people could learn to recognize hollow flattery, to confront betrayal, and to refuse unnecessary conflicts. He encouraged them to seek God's counsel above all. The villagers responded positively. Young men questioned their infatuations more thoughtfully, looking beyond beauty to character. Husbands and wives strove for greater honesty. Neighbors learned to settle disputes quickly rather than letting them fester. The changes were subtle, but real. Miss Hale marveled that Solomon's words, once hidden in an old scroll, now shaped everyday life. He saw families grow stronger, friendships deepen, and peace flourish in small ways. The wisdom had not ended with Solomon's downfall. It lived on, improved by the lessons of generations. One evening, after teaching a small group, Miss Hale strolled by the fields under a starry sky. He felt humbled and grateful. He understood that human struggles would never vanish entirely. Temptation, deception, and discord would always exist, but so too would the tools to resist them. He looked up at the stars and whispered a prayer of thanks. He remembered Solomon's final plea, "Do not make the same mistakes he did." Miss Hale vowed to heed that plea, and to help others do the same. As he walked home, the soft chirping of crickets reminded him that life was beautiful, challenging, and meaningful. With discernment, faith, and virtue, people could navigate life's complexities. Solomon's warnings had become a beacon of hope, lighting the path toward a more honest and harmonious existence. Miss Hale's journey through Solomon's wisdom wasn't just a lesson for him. It's a call for all of us to reflect on the influences shaping our lives. Which of Solomon's warnings resonated most with you? Seduction, betrayal, or discord? Let us know in the comments below. If this video gave you a fresh perspective, hit that like button, share it with someone who loves thought-provoking stories, and make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the wisdom of the ages. Let's keep the conversation going.